In studio, Professor George Lakoff, one of the world's best-known linguists, distinguished professor of cognitive science and linguistics at Berkeley, and now the author of The Political Mind, Why You Can't Understand 21st Century American Politics with an 18th Century Brain. Look at that. It looks beautiful. It's even got a brain on there and everything. Professor Lakoff, great to have you here.
Great to see you again.
All right. So, obviously, everyone knows about Don't Think of an Elephant, New York Times bestseller, etc. What do we got in the new book? What's The Political Mind about?
Well, one of the problems that a lot of people had with the previous books that I never put the science in. I'm a cognitive scientist, a linguist. I've been doing this for many years. And it turns out in the past 30 years, neuroscience and cognitive science have discovered that our normal view of the mind is not correct, and that matters for politics. I've been writing a number of books about this without mentioning the science, and this one introduces what the mind is really like, what all those results are, and it introduces it by way of the politics so that you can understand what the results about the mind are. And one of the problems that Democrats have is that they're still thinking about the mind as if it were the 18th century. So there's an old view of mind that came out of Descartes and out of the Enlightenment that came in with our country, which is, and it's now very popular, says reason is conscious. We're all conscious when we reason. That reason is disembodied and abstract. That reason can fit the world as it is, that it's logical, so if you give people the facts, they'll reason to the right conclusion, that it's dispassionate, that passion gets in the way of reason, and that the purpose of reason is self-interest, to pursue your self-interest. And the fact is, it's been discovered, every one of those is false.
That's interesting. How so? I might actually disagree with that a little bit, which will be fun, like I'm going to disagree with Professor Lakoff. But anyway, but how so? How do you think the brain actually works?
Okay, first, 98% of reason is unconscious. It's what your brain is doing when you're busy being conscious. Okay, so it's mostly there, and it's the unconscious reason is structuring the brain. It's also not just abstract and disembodied. You think with your brain physically, and that's a bunch of neural networks, but they're not general purpose. Your brain is structured to run your body. So you're thinking with a biological system that's set up to run a body, and it works not by digital computation, but by neural computation. And we've been in a neural computation lab for the past 20 years. I've been co-director of it, and we now know a lot about how that works. And it turns out that it affects a great deal about politics, among other things. So, for example, we don't just have our brains fitting the world as it is. Anything you understand has to go through a brain that is set up to run your body, and that is structured in certain ways. Now, let's take the issue of, is reason dispassionate? Suppose you have a stroke or a brain injury that doesn't allow you to feel emotion. Does that make you super rational, like Mr. Spock? No. It turns out that you can't be rational at all.
That's interesting. How so? What happens?
Well, imagine this. How would you know what to want?
Mm-hmm.
If you wouldn't know if it would like it or not like it, if like and not like didn't mean anything to you, and you didn't know how other people would react emotionally to you, you couldn't make a decision. And that's what happens to these folks. Now, why is the brain set up in such a way that your reaction to people is like that? And we have two major neural pathways for emotions, one for positive emotions, one for negative. But the neural systems in those pathways are connected to systems that have semantic content and directly to form integrated circuits. That's how we have melodramas and cultural narratives. And there's a whole chapter in here on the cultural narratives behind Anna Nicole Smith, for example.
Oh, that sounds fun.
It's fun. It's great. You finally understand why people had all these different understandings of them, but they all apply in politics. We have a rags to riches narrative that's in Obama's history. We have a glass ceiling narrative that's in Hillary's,
Professor Lakoff, can I ask you a broader and more simplistic question? Does this mean, in essence, that this idea of reason can't be separated from our emotions?
That's right.
And so that we have to take these emotions into account, especially if we're trying to influence the public in a sphere like politics?
Absolutely, and it's done all the time. So you have, take McCain's hero story. That's a very emotional story. If you take Obama's story, it's a very emotional story. And those stories are crucial, and they use more elementary stories, like the rags to riches narrative that is used all over the place. It's part of political biographies. It's part of every soap opera on TV. There are these things showing up all the time, and you live your life through that.
That's interesting, and I want to get to the political ramifications of that and how one party's playing it right and the other isn't. But before we do that, real quick, my slight disagreement, okay, if I can. And, you know, you have the science to back it up, so this is going to be...
Yeah.
But I want to run it by you. And maybe it's not a disagreement. Maybe it's something that you guys have already, looked at, which is, I think in the short term, you're entirely right that especially on a micro level, on a person-to-person level, all of our reason is tied in with emotion. There's no question about it. In fact, it drives it a lot of times, as you've just explained. But I think on a macro level, in the long run, and politics isn't in the long run, politics is very short-run oriented a lot of times, but in the long run, although you talk about that a little bit in the book too, about how the Democrats have to frame for the long run as well. In the long run, I believe that reason does matter.
This is reason, and that's the point. And it's not just the cultural narratives and melodramas. You also have frames that are structures, that are neural structures through which you understand the world, and they're very normal things. What's a frame? Take your understanding of a restaurant. A frame has two parts. It has elements like a waiter, a maitre d', a menu, a dish, and so on, and a sequence of elements, a scenario, namely, you're greeted at the door, you're seated, you get a menu, you order, your dish comes, you eat, you pay your check. That scenario defines your understanding of a restaurant. And a word like menu or waiter is defined by that frame. And that frame is physically there in your brain. We now have a good idea of what that neural computation has to be like. In addition, we also understand the world through metaphorical thought. And that's unconscious. By the time you're 6 or 7, you have learned hundreds of modes of metaphorical thought. And just by living in the world, I mean, for example, more is up and less is down. Why? You pour more water in the glass, level goes up every time, but why should it give rise to a metaphor? The reason is this. You're a kid, you watch this happen, your brain registers an increase in verticality as there is an increase in quantity at the same time, over and over and over, two different parts of the brain. When that happens, the activation in these two parts of the brain gets stronger and spreads out. It's called spreading activation along existing pathways. As it spreads and is repeated over and over, those spreading parts get stronger and they spread more and more until the shortest path is found between them. And then you form a circuit, and that circuit is the metaphor, and it's physical.
So